social activists are like more susceptible to burnout. And so
Yeah.
self-care is supposed to like help you with the emotional weight of, talking about systematic injustice and
Yeah.
racism and like the slow pace of social change, or in this case, the reversal of it.
Listen. Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Be Well Sis podcast. I am your host, Dr. Cassandra Dunbar. How has life been treating you? But more importantly, how have you been treating yourself? Me, I am well, and I'm super excited to have today's conversation. Today's conversation features a fellow podcaster, and she's a historian, and her name is Toya Coleman. In our conversation today, we talk about self-care, especially the legacy of self-care practices that's been passed on to us by the Black Panther Party, and how they use self-care as a form of resistance from many of the systemic injustices. They also laid the foundation for many of the self-care practices that are still so relevant for today. So as always, thank you so much for joining. I am so glad you're here. Be well, sis. I want to ask you how you're doing PMS. So physically, mentally, and spiritually, like in this moment.
Okay, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Physically, I like feel strong. I've been like consistently, I think that's the one thing that I've managed to do in the new year is like continue my workout routine, which is more like mental
Mhm.
for me than anything. So I feel like physically, I guess, like if I'm just talking about like, yeah, I feel good. I feel
Good.
good in that place. Mentally, it depends on the day.
I get it.
I have like last year was a really big transition for me, and
Mhm.
like I moved from LA back to New York. I got laid off. So I feel like I'm still in like mid transition right now. I'm living with my mother. So
Yeah,
which is like a privilege as well to be able to have a soft place to land.
but it's
But
different.
it's different, and it,
Yeah,
it presents its own challenges. So I think mentally it depends on the day.
I get it.
And then on top of like just the political climate.
Listen, I'm tired.
Yes, and then spiritually, I think I'm working on that. Like I've been like meditating and
Yeah.
journaling and also just like figuring out what I even want to do beyond that. I think like a lot of people or like Black people or me in particular, like I grew up in like a Christian
Same.
background and I kind of like outgrew that as I got older. And so I'm just like, okay, like what do I believe in? And I found like a non-denominational church that I like listen to.
Mhm.
But I'm also trying to be like a part of community. And I
Mhm.
think that is affecting my mental, just like I
Mhm.
talked about it on like threads or something. I was like, people talk about like dating rosters, and I'm trying to like rebuild a friendship roster.
That's real. Mhm.
And so I think just kind of combating the loneliness that comes with like moving to a different place or moving
Yeah.
back to a place where you're just a different person and like your friendships have changed. So that
Yeah.
was a lot. But yeah, that's where I'm at. What about you?
I
What's your
appreciate
PMS?
that. Listen, I feel like we're kind of aligned except for the physical part. So
Uh-huh.
I I completely fell off the bandwagon in terms of being intentional about spending time like working on my body, like and
Mhm.
moving my body. I used to
Yeah.
be so diligent. I was last year I was doing Orange Theory.
Me
So
too. I love Orange Day, but they're
it's too
pricey.
loud. Okay, that and also it's just they have new instructors. My favorite girl, like she like left, and then
Mm.
the one that fits my schedule, like the music, he be trying to DJ and no, stick to the track. Like he tries to blend it and it's awful. And it's just his
It
volume
takes
is
you
too
out.
loud. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm just like, I look at him like, so because of that, I'm like, before I would force myself to go even if I didn't want to go.
Mhm.
But now I'm just like, I'm just not going to go. And I haven't gone. I haven't gone all since Christmas. I have not stepped
That's
foot
not that
in there.
long. That's not that long. It's
That's
still January.
yeah. But we're at the end of January. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like
yes.
when I used to go like at least 3 times a week. So going from
Mhm.
3 to like 0, and I sound like I walk anymore because it's cold out now.
Yes.
I could be doing better in terms of
Mhm.
my body. So I don't feel that strong. Mentally, I think I'm right where you are.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot going on in the country. And every day since that man has come in office, like it's more stuff. So I'm trying to tune it out.
Mhm.
Um, and trying to find the balance of like being informed, but also keeping my little marbles. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I'm there. And then just, the regular life, this I'm a mom, so all of their things. And spiritually, I feel like I'm where you are. I'm very curious about about things, and I grew up in a very, like, conservative home,
Mhm.
and it just doesn't align with who I am today, and I don't want my kids to have to unlearn the things that I've had to unlearn. So I don't raise them in the church, and part of me feels guilty because of the community piece. I had a lot of
Mhm.
community rooted in the church. So I'm looking for also something non-denominational and trying to find my tribe, down here in person too. So I really, really feel you. I get it.
Mhm.
I get it. I think a lot of us are in a similar space,
Mhm. Yeah,
you
and I
know?
think, like, I said, like, community is probably the word of the year for, like, the
Mhm.
world, like, for
Yep.
everybody. I think everyone is either leaning on community or looking for community,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, the Black church is, like, as problematic
Yes.
as it was a form of community, and I think, for a lot of us who are, like, challenging or didn't align with that, it's good that we have, like, broken out of that cycle, but then it's like, how do we make up for that community? Because it's very much a
Right.
part of, like, who we are or,
Yeah.
like, connecting with people, like, outside
Yep.
of religion, you know what I mean? Like, you made friends and, like,
Yep.
you had things to do.
Exactly.
So it's really
Yeah.
interesting, yeah.
And I think about too how a lot of us are talking about looking for community and people are like, people are negative in terms of when people find their community or think they have community online. But the pandemic did a number on a lot of us. You know, we were forced inside, right? Because we had to. And then, even when the doors were open again and the pandemic was, quote, over, I know for me, I still have some anxiety. When there's a crowd, I'm always looking around and some people are like immunocompromised or whatever, like they
Mhm,
just don't have the ability to be in like community, like in terms of being outside like that. So
mhm.
it's a lot. It's a lot of things.
Yeah. And I also
Yeah.
feel like I don't know if it's just the state of the world, but what I've also noticed, and there's nothing against it, I think it's just like a reflection of the economy. I feel like a lot of community is like there's a paywall behind it.
Yes.
And that is like disheartening, especially as someone who's like obviously like in transition, like financially, but also just like,
Yeah.
where's the free community? Like, why
Right.
is
Right.
everything kind of like, okay, like if you want to go to this vision board party, pay for
Right.
this. And I get it, you're giving supplies, I guess. But it's just like, there's just like a lot of I just never noticed that before, I think.
Yeah. And for me, it feels like it doesn't feel authentic. Like, if I have to pay my way into this, like, is this really community? You know, I feel
Mhm.
like growing up, especially somebody who spent like most of their time at church, like there were things that's just like, come, like you don't have to be a member of this church. It's just for us to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that way, if you feel comfortable, like you keep coming back, and if you don't, like, okay, that's fine too. But like, yeah, to your point, everything's behind a paywall. How
Mhm.
authentic is that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like for in-person things. Like I get it for like,
Hmm.
podcasts, like, yeah, we're doing this stuff for free. I get the
Right.
paywalls for that. But
Right.
I'm like, the paywall for a link up? Okay.
Right, right. And there's just so like, there's a lack of, like, third spaces, you know? Like,
Yes.
everywhere that you go, you have to pay to be there as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the people who are hosting it probably are paying for the space. So it
mhm.
makes sense, but it's just like, this is
Damn. Still a
yeah.
barrier.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So I'm really excited to talk about what we're gonna talk about today, and you had a brilliant idea
Mm,
to talk about, the Black Panthers and their legacy in terms of wellness, and how there are so many things that we still, do that we don't know the foundation was actually found in the Black Panther Party. So
mhm.
let's talk about it. So, the first thing I kind of want to talk about is how we typically associate the Black Panther Party with like political activism and community defense, but they also had like they had a, I guess, revolutionary idea when it comes to approach to community well being. So, how was healthcare and wellness like central to their mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. In like my research, it was just kind of like, it actually was started a lot by the women in the Black Panther Party. And I feel like a lot of the women don't
Yep.
get a lot of credit in the Black Panther
Yep.
Party or like in anything, right?
Yep.
And so like people like Angela Davis and Erica Huggins, like they got incarcerated at one time. And during that time, they started meditating and doing yoga because a lot of them were like put in like solitary confinement. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Of course, they were already arrested like under false pretenses and
Hmm.
then they were, like, isolated. So they started doing like yoga and meditation to kind of keep their sanity, right? When they're like in the dark. And so when they
Right.
came out, they started kind of implementing those practices in the party.
Mhm.
And so they really took on self-care in 2 parts, like, one as an individual, right? Like, you have to take care of yourself, and I always
Mhm.
think about the, like, airplane analogy, like, when you get on the plane, if it's going down, you have to put your mask on first,
First,
right?
yeah.
And so that's, like that was their one approach, obviously, like, you have to take care of yourself, and then it was also, like, a community part of self-care of, like, we're gonna have our own breakfast program, right? We're gonna feed our own kids. They're not getting food, we're gonna feed them.
Mhm.
And so it was just kind of like that twofold of individualism and then community, and, like, self-care is not like, it has those 2 layers, and I
Yeah.
think it was also just a counteract to, like, Western medicine, right? When we think
Mhm.
about the way that Western medicine has treated Black people,
Right.
it's
Yep.
just we have a mistrust, and we think about I think about, like, the BMI, they always talk about
Yes.
how that is anti-Black, and
Yep.
everything is kind of researched and in the lens of white people, and particularly white men, like
Men.
even
Yep.
ADHD for a long time. That's why there's so many people now, women in particular, being diagnosed later on with ADHD because the experiments or like the trials and the understanding
Yep.
of it was just from like a white man's lens, right? And
Lens.
so it
Yep.
just showed up in men as hyper, but in women it shows up differently.
Yeah.
So that is just like, and then we can go back to like all different types of things, like the Tuskegee experiments and, like, all
Yeah.
those type of things where we have mistrust and then obviously, like, the mortality rates of women in birth.
Yeah.
And so I think with all those things and they knowing about all those things kind of, like, ahead of time,
Yeah.
they created, this idea of self-care to kind of counteract
Mhm.
Western medicine, like, this is not even for us, and we
Mhm.
just know in general Western medicine is more like kind of, like, responsive instead of preventative.
Exactly. Very, very reactive. You know what?
Yeah.
You mentioned that they were doing things like yoga, right? And
Mhm.
meditation. And I remember like in my early adulthood when I was exposed to what is yoga, what is meditation, I was just like, oh, that's for white people. But the Black Panther Party, you know what I mean, was
Yeah,
actually doing that. And it don't get no more black than that, you know?
exactly, for sure,
Yeah.
and I think, like, yoga I even think I was looking at something recently, like Pilates, there was, like, a Black woman who helped
Yes.
create Pilates, so I think a lot of times these things become whitewashed, like,
Right.
modernized, like, right? It's like they erase which is, like,
Mm-hmm.
why we have our podcast, right? Like, they erase
Right.
kind of, like, the Black impact
Mm-hmm.
or history of some of these practices that have been going on for a long time, like,
Yeah.
yoga is really, like, what? Like, I think it's, like, more, like, Indian and, like, Middle
Mm-hmm.
Eastern. It's not
Mm-hmm.
white, but, like,
Right.
that's
Right.
who practices it here that's who we see represented
Mm-hmm.
here in America the
Yep.
most, and so it's just, like, really interesting, like you said, we think that these things are white, but they're very much, like,
Yeah.
non-white.
Exactly.
They're very
Yeah.
much the complete opposite, and, I think with the history and, like, the research I did around the Black Panther Party and, like, self-care, they also talked about, like, political activist burnout. I kept on seeing that phrase, and
Mhm.
apparently it came out, like, in the 1970s, which is also around the time of the Black Panther Party,
Mhm.
and it was just, like, this concept that, like, activists in particular, like, you're doing all this work, right? You're dealing with a lot of hardship, and so, like, in order to, like, combat burnout, you have to take care of yourself. So that was, like, another thing that I found out about that I was like, "Oh, that's really
Yeah.
interesting," because it was, like, a German American philosophist came up with it,
Mm.
and, he was just saying how, like, social activists are, like, more susceptible to burnout, and so
Yeah.
self-care is supposed to, like, help you with the emotional weight of, talking about systematic injustice and
Yeah.
racism and, like, the slow pace of social change, or in this case, the reversal of
Mm.
it.
Listen.
And then also
Yeah.
the constant exposure to, like, trauma and resistance.
Right, right. And I think like you just linked it back to today. I think it's super, super important for us to really lean into the self-care practices. I was scrolling on X. I shouldn't be on X, but I was scrolling on X. I remember one person who I forget his name, but he was really upset at the idea. It was a black man. He was upset at the idea of us wanting to rest at this time.
Mm,
And, he was just like, "If you're resting, you ain't getting shit done, and it's gonna be a detriment to us." And I was like, "Well, it really depends on what your definition of rest is," you know? To your point, when you are faced with all of these undoings of, like, things that we had fought so hard for, right? It's like traumatizing to your nervous system. And then if you are actually in the front lines too, like there might actually be like physical trauma that you're experiencing, like all of these things. You have to figure out how to care for yourself and to rest and to restore your body as well. So I think even for people who aren't necessarily consider themselves to be activists, it's super important to really lean into whatever makes you feel restored or regenerated, and to give yourself like the minimums, right? Like you mentioned that the Black Panther Party was who founded like the free breakfast program that
Mhm.
now is done nationwide. So
Yeah.
just getting the bare minimum, like you're not going to be productive if you're hungry. Like if your blood sugar is low, like you all over the
Yeah.
place, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, like, I mean, to your point too, I just feel like as I feel like it's just hard in general if you are a non, like, cis white man at
Sure.
this point,
Yep.
whether or not you align as an activist, just, like, reading the
Mhm.
headlines,
Yep.
knowing what's going on, like, it just takes a toll on your mental health, like, you know what
Yep.
I mean? And so I think, like, over the next 4 years, we're gonna just have to lean into not only community, but, like, these self-care practices
Yeah.
as individuals
Yep.
and as community, like, creating spaces for us to, like, get together and enjoy each other
Each
and
other.
laugh
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
um yeah, whether or
Yeah.
not you consider yourself in the trenches, I'm really disappointed that that person said that you shouldn't be
Same.
resting.
Same. And I'm happy that there are other people in the comments who saw it the way I saw it. Cause
Yeah.
yeah, I think he was just at the moment, I forget what was the bill that was undone, that he just was really reacting, and I think that's also
Mhm.
part of it too, knowing when to react and when not to. I
Yeah.
think part of self-care is taking a beat, processing, and then doing, but you're not gonna make you're not gonna make good decisions if they are just impulsive based off of what you're feeling in that moment
Yeah.
as well. So, which is why things like yoga, which is why things like meditation are able to help ground you and to help you have more clarity, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I
Yeah,
also think I mean, not to get political, but I think part of what we're experiencing like, this is what he wants. He wants us
that part.
to have a reaction to every little
Everything.
thing, to
Mhm.
turn against each other, to tell you
Mhm.
shouldn't be resting. It's like, why are we doing this to one another? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think that is something that we have to really look at. Like, some of the strategy and the fear, a part of that, the tactic is working and it's happening. It's only been
Yep.
like a week or two, but it's like, I
Just
think
wild. Mm.
having to like regulate one another and be there for one another and not just like respond to everything, even sharing some of it, because some of it is like he'll do something and then it gets rolled back, or it's not,
Mhm.
it's not a bill, it's just
Right.
being, you know what I mean? So I think, um, like you were saying earlier, like that thin line between wanting to be informed
Yep.
and also wanting to preserve yourself, and then also wanting to protect not only yourself, but your community. Like, do I need to
Right.
share this right now?
Right. 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 Yep. Ooh, you said a couple of things there. I was watching a video. This man is, I think he's in the US right now, but he's German. He's an older gentleman. I think he was like maybe in his 60s. And
Mhm.
he was saying, and he's a historian as well. And he was saying one of the ways that Hitler was able to do what he was able to do was the same tactic, like all of the shock. So the masses got just so worn down mentally by all that he was saying constantly and doing constantly, that you get to a point where if you're reacting, actually stop reacting and you're just apathetic. So now
Mm,
you just lay down and you just take it because
yeah,
your nervous system is shot, you know?
yeah, yeah. And that's where the
And
self-care comes in.
that part, exactly. Yeah,
Mhm, mhm,
exactly. When you look at today's like wellness influencers and just like the wellness
mhm.
culture, we'll call it,
Yeah,
right? Um, what echoes of the Black Panthers' approach to self-care do you see that are still, like, here and apparent, but aren't necessarily named, um, as
mhm.
having their origins in the Panthers Party and their thinking?
I mean, I think yoga, like we talked about yoga, I think
Mhm,
Pilates, like I think moving your body, like that was very much a part of their form of resistance. So I think
mhm,
that, and that's really also kind of what we're talking about, like the response to the systematic racism in healthcare, right? Everyone trying to like, even when we talk about people, like I don't really enjoy like diet culture, but like when
same.
people talk about like holistic
Mhm.
eating and all of that. I feel like that's
Mhm.
rooted definitely in the Black Panther Party because it was really kind of creating an alternative to systems that didn't, to allow Black communities to care for themselves independently. And the only way to do that is to think about how much you're eating, how much
Yeah.
protein you're taking. Like people are
Yeah.
really taking on, besides like, the way that it can look sometimes, which is like fine. But I
Mhm.
think people at the root of it, especially some people who are really like sharing meals and holistic stuff, like that is really about self-preservation and,
Patient.
like, not really trusting the Western system, you know what I
Right.
mean? And I
Right.
think that is really what the Black Panther Party was doing because they were trying to use it as a powerful tool for political resistance.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, like,
Yeah.
it I think the evolve has it's very apparent, I think, in
Yeah.
terms of just even the way people are eating. I think we always think about, like, working out and, like, the face
Mhm.
washes and stuff like that, but I'm, like, leaning towards more, like, the people who are like, this is, like, more nutritional stuff. Like, I see a
Yes.
lot of those women on, like, YouTube and Instagram and, like,
Yeah.
all that stuff, and, like, even though sometimes I feel like it's a bit much, um, I think it's really rooted in like, okay, how can I keep my bone density that goes down
Right.
as I get
Right.
older? So let me show you how I intake 100 grams of protein, which is like the standard, right? And like with
Right.
that helps you. People talk about their vitamins, like
Mhm.
all of that is just
Yeah.
about like not going to the doctor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And you said the resistance piece. I think oftentimes whenever we think about resistance, we think about, well, we're going to be marching in the streets. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's resistance. But to your point and what they were trying to show us, just taking care of ourselves and just our individual like survival in and of itself is resistance. Being healthier is we're able to now resist in other ways as well.
I was gonna agree with that because I love this. There's a quote from Audre Lorde, and she says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgent; it is
Mhm.
self-preservation. This is an act of political warfare."
Mm.
And I really think about that because I did what inspired me to come here and have this conversation with you is I think like one of my earlier episodes was about how like self-care is a form of resistance, right? It's a
Yeah.
political act,
Yes.
especially for, people of color, especially for
Yes.
Black women in particular who are at the bottom of the healthcare system, right? Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
so we often don't get believed about our pain. We don't get
Yep.
believed about all
Yeah.
different types of things, and
Yep.
so, and a lot of medical things like fibroids and all this stuff run with Black women, and so
Mhm.
and there's, like, no research on why and how, and that's, like,
Mhm.
another whole thing, but, I think in that, that's where the self-care comes from, and yeah, people
Yeah.
don't think about it as a political act, like you said, I think we always think that it's, like, very marching, and those things
Yes.
are too,
Yeah.
but, like, political
It's
acts
layered.
also can be, taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, taking care of your neighbors.
Mhm.
I saw somebody say something like, like you so like, like helping somebody, you think about like a GoFundMe, but like paying for your unemployed friend's lunch, that
Mhm.
is helping, right?
Yeah.
That's resistance. And
Yeah.
I think that, you know,
Mhm.
that is something that we often overlook. It's just like moving your body, taking care of yourself, checking in with yourself, checking in with your friends are all forms of self-care
Resistance and
and
self-care.
resistance. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's why we're gonna have to do that, especially during this time. It's just we're really gonna have to understand and redefine what like resistance is. Like, yes, it could be protesting Target,
Mhm.
but it could also be making sure that like you're healthy or like,
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Mhm.
And you know what I've been seeing the rise of, like, community gardens and things like that, like, that's also resistance. Now we're gonna have access, like, locally to nutritious foods, and then also just because it's a community garden, we're together, like, we're forming community, we're making something together.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is also I can see that being part of what they were doing too, like, the dimensional, like, layered approach to what activism is. I think
Mhm.
they have just really laid a really nice blueprint for us to follow because it's not
Yeah.
just, like you said, boycotting Target or whoever else or marching, it's also all of these things too.
Yeah, because I think about one thing, like, when I was in LA, people would do, like, beach cleanups. Like, those
Mm.
are just, like, taking care of yourself and taking care of your community is political resistance because we know that we can't the government is not gonna do it, right?
Right.
Like, we know that, and
Mhm.
we know that especially with this current one. So it's like, okay, how and what ways can I show up for myself and for each other? Which ways can we show up for each other
Mhm.
that can create community, but also, like, enhance things or make things
Yep.
better.
Yep.
And I think, like, yeah, community gardens, they're popping up all over New
Mhm.
York.
Yep.
I think, like, the beach cleanups that were happening in LA. And
Yep.
then you see it with, like, how people responded to the wildfires, like, a lot of people
Yeah.
volunteering.
Yep.
And that's just, like, one thing that I definitely have on my radar for this year is, like, I do want to I was volunteering in LA, but, like, finding a place to volunteer
To
here,
New
and it
York.
doesn't have to necessarily even be like I think we think volunteer, we think like soup kitchen, which is like
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
But like for me, I'm like, okay, maybe I want to volunteer at, like my local library or like,
Ooh.
or at the museum or
Mhm.
just, like at these like public spaces
That's
that
true.
funding's probably gonna get cut.
True. Yeah, you're
And
right.
that are also just like fun to like be a part of community as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I never considered the library or a museum, and to your point, funding is limited, so I'm
Mhm.
sure they could use people's help. Really, really good idea. Um, oh, I love that. And I think about too, going back to like beach cleanups and community like gardens and things. Like if we're not getting good food and the environment is what it is, that's going to keep us sick. If you keep us sick, we're weak. If we're weak, nothing like we can't fight for progress and fight for change and all of that. So yeah, it's all interconnected. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an
It's
ecosystem.
really and truly, yep.
Yeah.
Really and truly. So I wanna know, these days, with all the things that are happening in the world,
Mhm.
what is something that's bringing you some joy? Because joy is important.
Yeah, I think that reading has been bringing me a lot of joy, like just getting off my phone, picking up a book. It's been hard to do. I wish I think I need to do it more, but I think reading has really helps me bring some joy. Spending time with like my mom, I
Mhm.
think that, as you get older and you like move around, you don't get to spend as much time with
True.
your family members. And like, some people don't even, I also your parents are getting older. Sometimes you don't
Yeah.
even have your parents. So I think just even just spending time with my mom, like talking to her,
Mhm.
listening
Yeah.
to her stories, like, just being, present
Yeah.
has been bringing me joy too. It brings me a little
I love that.
annoyance, but joy
Of
too.
course, of course, of course.
And yeah, reading and also I think meditating, like, I've been really surprised at how consistent I've been, and just to take, 3 minutes, it doesn't have to be too crazy,
Mhm.
and sometimes I lay down, sometimes, like, right before bed, because
Mhm.
it's like I think we have to redefine these things. I think sometimes we're introduced to these, like, self-care things or just anything, and it's like, "This is how you do it," and it's like, you can do it the way that
Right.
you wanna do it.
Or that could be just so radical, like, for what your life is. So I'm the type that I like to keep moving. So if you tell
Mhm.
me I need to meditate for 20 minutes, I'm just like, 20 minutes? I can't do that, you know? So
Mhm.
yeah, so redivide it for what makes sense for you and
Yeah,
yeah, fits your personality, your lifestyle, all those things.
exactly, or, like, you can listen to a meditation while you're cleaning up, like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be so strict,
Yeah,
and I think that's why people sometimes I think people, like, are kind of intimidated by self-care in that concept because sometimes it comes across as, like, very rigid,
that's
right?
true. That's true. Yeah,
And then it
very
can also
true.
come across as privileged.
Yes.
Right? Like,
Yep.
only because like, if you think about it in the sense that of how we see it on social, a lot of times
Yep.
it's like, "Oh, this is, like, a very privileged thing. This is a very
Yep.
expensive thing to do."
Yep.
And it does not have to be, you
At
know what I
all.
mean?
At
Like,
all.
self-care could be, like, reading your book or deleting the social media apps on the weekend. Like, those are
Mhm.
also forms of self-care. I think we think about, like, Botox and
Right,
Pilates
right,
5 times
right.
a week, and that's
Exactly.
cool too.
Right.
But it's not it's a range, you know what I mean? There's a
Exactly.
spectrum of
Yes,
self-care.
self-care. I love that. A spectrum of self-care. Yes.
Yeah, so, those are things that bring me joy.
I wanted to ask you about what books you're reading because
Oh,
'cause I've
okay,
been
okay.
reading a lot of books too.
Okay, okay.
So what books are you reading right now?
I'm reading I think it comes out on the 4th, but I think it's called The Love Lyric by Christina Forrest.
Okay.
And it's like it's a 3 series. So it was
Okay.
about 3 sisters, and so I think this is the 3rd one, and,
Mhm.
it's like a love story. So each sister has, like, their own challenges in the love department,
I love it.
and so each book has been dedicated to them, like, finding love, but also kind of exposing their family dynamic and their sister relationship. So I'm reading
Mhm.
that right now,
I love it.
and I'm enjoying it, and then I have some
Yeah.
other books that are coming down the pipeline,
Okay,
hopefully.
nice,
Yeah.
nice. So tell the people, where can they find you and what is next? All those good things.
Yeah. So you can find me on Toya from Harlem. That's
Mm,
like my handle everywhere on the interwebs.
mhm.
And then my podcast is called That Wasn't in My Textbook, which you can also find on the interwebs. So I'll be doing bi-weekly episodes again. And yeah, that's where you can find me. And I just talk about Black non-white history, mostly
Mhm.
Black history, but, like, sometimes I make it fun and I'll do, like, pop culture, like the history of Barbie, the history of
Ooh,
cannabis, so I like stuff like that.
nice.
And yeah, just, like,
Yeah. So
figuring out life in
I
real
hear
time.
you. I hear you. So I will put all of where you can find Toya and listen to the podcast down below
Mhm.
in the show notes. Thank you so much, Toya. I really, really appreciate this conversation and thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to hearing your episode and seeing what you do this season because it's always
Yes.
great.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Well Sis. If you'd like to get in touch with us, there's a link in the show notes. Be Well Sis is hosted by me, Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, and produced by Edit Audio. Don't forget to hit follow so you never miss an episode. Until next time, be well, sis.